It's not a coincidence that when you look at these violent Antifa demonstrations, you see any photograph of those who were assembled. To be blunt, not one of the people that is demonstrating looks like a normal person. Every one of them, their outer appearance becomes a manifestation of their inner hatred.
Great. Here we go. Horrible note to start on. Wow. It's like when you think you've swallowed it, but it's still up in your mid throat.
Oh shit.
Take two.
Okay. Today, very exciting. We got our wish. We got some new myth. We got the newest update to the metaphysics of MAGA provided by Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio. They have been working on it behind the scenes. The new myth du jour. Wouldn't you know it? It's just a messy grab bag of metaphors. We have cancer, we have ugliness, we have the clouds of darkness and encroaching darkness. This is as old as it goes, the encroaching darkness coming to consume white families, of course. So we got about 45 minutes of them talking here, and I don't know, I'm scared. I'm scared. Yeah. It's all mythic rhetoric. I wouldn't say it's great. It's not very high effort. Mostly because there's no thematic through line here. I think they could really benefit from having sticking to one theme instead of including everything. Demons, darkness, ugliness, sickness. It's all thrown in there. Yeah. And they're speaking to, I believe, a room of diplomats. But of course, we're all meant to hear about it. This is for our benefit. And they are declaring war on a demon army, which includes Cuba and some other things. There's a conspiracy. There's cancer that must be cut out of civilization. If we need to survive, or if we're going to survive, we need a new, renewed alliance against the newest evil. And the newest evil is an old evil, actually. It's rising left-wing terror, or what is it? Far left terror.
FLT.
Right. So this is an interesting universe. It's a spin-off universe. It's only very tenuously connected to what we more generally share as the reality system, the reality myth, the reality principle. This is more like a middle school project they did the night before as far as myth goes. It's like, yeah, leftists are ugly and they're sick and they're coming for your children. Ooh, spooky.
It's the fake real that it's all pretending to cover up, but isn't really there.
Yes, exactly. This is a Disneyland for sure. But the key to a good myth or a spin-off reality, the key to having a good spin-off is that it incorporates enough events that the rest of us share as real in that we have faith in them. This is where Rubio and Miller really stumble. They fall flat because they don't incorporate enough shared myth to get people to move over to the new story. So in that sense, it's really low effort.
He's trying to create a new anti-left international.
Yeah, exactly. But also the inverse. They're trying to create a leftist international when there isn't one.
The transnational far-left political terror network and the turning of those sorts of terrorism organizations and protocols that have developed since 9/11 inwards to target domestic acts of violence.
Well, they don't come outright and say the goal, and I think there probably is some goal behind all this, but you can infer it's kind of poking through at points, right? So in the immediate term, it seems to be being able to, with these other countries, financially targeting what they're calling terror networks. So financial, freezing people's assets, freezing people's bank accounts. And they probably have nothing to do with leftism. They're just enemies, designated enemies. I'm sure they have targets in mind. I don't know who those targets are. I'm sure someone does. But no, if you listen deep, you get like they're trying to go after some people's money. But if you listen to the surface, it just sounds like they want Anduril and Palantir facial recognition software on droids so they can massacre protesters in the street.
Oh, like that's the goal. Okay. I mean, I noticed this discourse emerging after the Charlie Kirk assassination. I feel like at that point, I could feel the sort of right-wing propagandists seeing an opportunity, right? And they're like, okay, now we can start to reframe this. And they started making all these links between, woke ideology and violence, and then the attempted Trump assassinations. Although one of the people who tried to assassinate Trump, I think, had like weird mixed political views. So, I do take it as a very propagandistic, opportunistic move. And in watching Marco Rubio, but especially watching Stephen Miller, I got this very visceral sense that he knew what he was doing. Like, I was looking at him and I could just like feel this glint in his eye, and I was like, you motherfucker. It's like, you know what you're doing. And I do think it's just this attempt to, legitimize crackdowns on activist organizations on the left. I feel like the goal is maybe some kind of new McCarthyism,
Creating a moral panic.
like a moral panic about like left-wing organizations. And it's frustrating because I think there are obviously stupid people on the fringes of the left that give the rhetorical ammunition, right? There are those people who kind of flirt with the aesthetics of left-wing violence, and they, fight the power. And there is this rhetoric that then they can cherry pick those instances and then use it and then make a connection and try to make a causal connection between.
No way. I'm going to have to disagree with you there. They are literally making things up out of thin air. There's no burden of responsibility on anyone in reality. For this.
Absolutely. I'm just saying, like, I sometimes think about like successful propaganda has to at least have a tiny little, like, grain of sand to build on. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Even if that grain of sand is just a perception, right? So, but that doesn't mean that you blame the grain of sand, right? I'm just saying that's the way it functions, right? Like, you need something to build on, and then it's like they can point to Twitter discourse, and they can point to, right, or they can point to, people who were celebrating, Hamas coming in on those like paragliders, like BLM posting those and be like, see, these are terrorists. They celebrate terrorism. So. Yeah.
There's a lot of ideological distortion being built around a potential kernel of truth, but probably not. It's usually just the potential for violence is like stuck in there and then attributed to something and then used to represent the whole movement.
Exactly.
How are you going to have an argument? You can't have an argument with someone who says that BLM almost overthrew the Republic. It's impossible.
It reminds me of the dumping of the algae into the pond, into the reflecting pool. It's like that was this tip of some conspiracy to bring down the state. It's like, whoa, slow down there. I mean, that probably didn't even happen, first of all. It was because of the blue and the heat, whatever. But then now it's a conspiracy. Now it's the tip of an iceberg, and so on and so forth. As the word escalation came up, and that's what all this is meant to do. Escalation, legitimate state crackdown, show how it's going to cross these thresholds of social acceptability, legal thresholds, and then the threshold of violence, pushing it into terrorism, murder, assassination territory, and then connect it to a global conspiratorial network and offer, what was it, a $10 million reward to information on the funding sources of global leftist networks.
And Cuba's a big part of this, apparently, according to them, I think.
Cuba has been funding sleeper cells for decades in the United States, he says.
Oh, the Cold War never ends.
This whole thing is for the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 7, which was signed on September 25, 2025. So this is, I think that was right after Charlie Kirk, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm.
And that's what they're talking about to these other countries, trying to get them on board. A couple weird things. There is very little reporting on this.
Yeah, I was looking for that too, and there was only a few.
There was an NPR story, but none of the main ones. But this seems like it seemed like an escalation seems like the right word.
Maybe I
Cross
wonder.
speech, it had a Hitler level of paranoia.
Well, it felt kind of McCarthyian or Hitler. Like, I do feel like part of the strategy also is I think, thinking about what Stephen Miller and others, like, what's the point of doing this? And I do feel like one of the primary moves is to create guilt by association, right? So if you can say that even if there's some quarters of the left, like, who will say stupid LARPy rhetorical things about violence, but then they try to connect it to Zoran Mondami and just be like, well, he doesn't condemn these people, like, he's part of it, like, they're all one thing, and even if like Zoran Mondami himself isn't saying anything violent, well, he's just okay with these other people, he's like part of it. So I think part of the strategy is to create guilt by association that can then be used as a political tool to try to I think it's no coincidence maybe that there is actually a little bit more appetite for populist left-wing candidates like a Mondami or like some of these others. And then this is like a useful tool for the right to react back to them and be like, well, we can just, we can try to condemn them all and say they're all part of this. They all authorize this kind of stuff. And secretly, people like Mondami were actually happy that Charlie Kirk got killed, and they want more people to get killed, right? And they're happy about obviously the healthcare CEO, I think, is bunched in with this left-wing terrorism, and look at, oh wow, like Zoran Mondami is talking about the importance of healthcare, and then that healthcare executive got killed. Like, he probably agreed. Like, I feel like that's this type of strategy here.
Yeah. Also saying that trans shooter was leftist because it was a trans shooter. Like, even though it was like a Terrogram copycat shooting, nothing to do with leftism as far as I
Also
know.
not even true.
But it's just like the four things that they can lump in here from the 1960s. He lumped in like Baader Meinhof, the Red Brigades, Weather Underground, I think he mentioned. So the left-wing terror body count, which it comes to like a few dozen in the last 70 years. This is a rising threat. And then there's like one person died in Greece, one person died in Germany. This is the flood that is upcoming. They want to make DSA a terrorist group eventually. I have no doubt about that. But
Of course.
this also doesn't make sense in that the DSA kind of helps the Republican cause, the voting cause, because nothing scares, Midwestern boomers more than communal Muslims taking over New York City. So it seems like they're way overplaying their hand, way overreacting to a threat in a way that does not help the least popular administration in modern memory. Like, this doesn't. It feels like I'm missing a piece that is needed to put the whole thing together. Because the money might make some sense of it.
It definitely.
But is Miller just a psychopath? Is that the?
Yeah, I think
it seems like that. It has to be more strategic than that.
No, but actually, I wonder if one of the things you said just now is the reason the mainstream media isn't covering it, because maybe a lot of the mainstream media just sees this as a totally obvious stretch, that they're just like, what's the point? This is just stupid rhetorical nonsense. Like, how many press conferences does Trump have announcing things that, well, like in your video, the reflecting pool, that is just like absurd. And it's like, what does this even mean? It's not gonna. But I also think there's an interesting point about.
Well, they gave those kids at the detention center like 500 years of prison time. One guy wasn't even there and got 30 years.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's true.
The silence appears to be consent, because like the apparatus for Trump and his administration to talk directly to people and bypass the mainstream media and all the journalistic standards has been so huge. It's been so built up since 2016 and in the latest cycle that, it's a pretty effective communication tool. Like, back in the day, I guess, when political parties wanted to get their message out there, they at least probably majority of it had to be channeled through the mainstream media, but that can be bypassed completely with YouTube and press releases and Twitter and Truth Social and all of these like direct to voters kind of communication methods now. So the media would just rather remain silent about it and sort of give it tacit consent rather than like submit it to a editorial coverage.
They did also release a list this week. The title is Cuba's Campaign of Subversion or something like that. The Campaign of Subversion. And one of the people who did report on this was Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! She's on the list. But so is Mamdani, the Ben and Jerry's founder, Hassan Piker. They're all like sleeper cells for Cuba. But they're putting elected representatives on the list. So I don't know. It seems like a stretch. You can maybe hurt them a bit by freezing their bank account, but I cannot imagine the public backlash to something like that happening. Jimmy Kimmel was one thing.
Well, the Democracy Now! Coverage was obviously critical, and they had a couple people on. They had like a former FBI agent and then like a investigative journalist named Ken Klipperstein, investigative reporter. And they both basically said something similar about this is the effort to turn that like sort of international terrorism apparatus inwards towards like domestic issues. And so you had like people fighting the ICE agents being charged with like terrorism adjacent charges and being handed out like huge sentences, and even people not directly involved in like the quote unquote violence against the ICE agents being arrested and like threatened with jail time.
Given jail time.
Yeah, given
even though they
jail
weren't
time.
there.
Yeah. So like they were basically in agreement that, this is like setting up that sort of thing where like there are domestic terrorism cases too. And those were largely built around right-wing violence, which since the beginning of time has been the larger and more dangerous threat, like, Ku Klux Klan. A lot of that legislation was built around like white nationalism and stuff like that. And so that stuff and the international terrorism stuff being joined together and put to the, purposes of the current administration. Hence this like sort of cycle of converging these different threats together, left-wing violence, left-wing politics, activism, and normal participation in the political process, crossing like legal thresholds and crossing thresholds of violence, all of this being like put together and put under this label of like far left terrorism, FLT, and all the sort of variations on that. It becomes this big, massive network. It networks together all these different, largely unrelated things, mostly peaceful things, mostly justified things that are well, and it puts them into this camp of like, this is beyond the pale, because it all is associated with this like this violence that has the potential to destabilize the state and threaten like Western civilization and threaten the very fabric of like American society, which is like one of the biggest claims they're making. This is all, violence against the state. They hate the state. They hate government. They hate order.
They hate God.
Yeah, and they hate God, and they hate what? That they're how was Rubio putting it? Like they are weak people who hate our achievements and hate our strength and all this like sort of weird Nietzschean language.
This is a distinctive and unique evil. It has always been driven by a hatred, above all else, a hatred for civilization itself. It is a revolt of the worst against the best, a revolt of the weak and the cowardly against the strong and the good. It is perpetrated by those who cannot build, who cannot create, who cannot achieve great things, and take their revenge upon the world for their own inadequacy by seeking to destroy those who can. This is what radical leftism is.
Yeah, he did. He made that. He made like two massive columns. They each had their columns. Always be on alert for columns of oppositions. But Rubio, he said, like, we are the builders, the creators, the inventors, the strong, the brave. And the left, they are the destroyers. They destroy us because they hate us and they're jealous of us. So the envious, also the weak and the cowardly, right?
Yeah, I want to give a good example from Miller's speech, but actually first I just want to say back up to something you said about like how they're trying to connect this kind of diffuse, disconnected things, some cases of violence. Like I think for me also, whenever there's discourse about terrorism, I just for a long time have found any view that thinks that the main cause of terrorist acts, insofar as we can call something a terrorist act, is ideology, like unconvincing. I feel like the only times when terrorist acts are really, primarily committed through some sort of ideology is when there's some network, there's some organized network behind it, and there's actually like a goal. Like for example, with in Ireland when they had the Troubles, like I feel like there was like a whole organized resistance there, but a lot of the cases that he's pointing out are these lone gunman, lone bomber cases. And I've always found it unconvincing to connect those kinds of cases to ideology. People say mental health. I think something like that is a better explainer. And whether it's on the right or the left, I mean, these right wing, which by the way, that's another thing that the NPR story covered is, if you look at the past 20 years, I mean, there's obviously way more, I think 4 or 5 times more right-wing terrorism. I think it's just in the last 2 years where technically there's been, if we even accept the label of what the ideology is, left-wing terrorism, there's been more. But if you just look at the last 10 years, there's way more. And again, even then I'm skeptical about connecting it to an ideology. I just think that the ideology is kind of has kind of weak or at least incomplete explanatory force for these like lone kind of gunman cases, But then when we think about the discourse that they use, I mean, this is so Stephen Miller, he says here in his speech, leftists look at a perfect family with the perfect life and a perfect job and perfect kids that goes to church every Sunday and is filled with a feeling of inadequacy and jealousy.
And they covet, and they turn those emotions ultimately into a desire to subjugate, to oppress, and to inflict pain and suffering. The leftist looks at what is beautiful and what is good and what is natural and is filled with envy and hatred.
Not one of these people that is demonstrating looks like a normal person. Not one looks normal. They are all deformed in some way in their appearance, in their dress, in their mannerisms.
This was the best.
Isn't that hilarious?
What kind of argument is that? Don't listen to those guys. They're ugly. That's funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Funny enough. Also a Nietzschean argument. He said the Athenians were right not to listen to Socrates because he was ugly. He also calls them a cancer. So there's the healthy body are the people who goes to church. He doesn't go to church, right? He's a
Jew.
It's okay. The cancer outside of the church, while the perfect families. It's like what this is.
And it's envy. It's driven by envy.
I have to think when Goebbels said this stuff, it sounded like plausible.
When who said this?
Goebbels.
Oh, yeah.
Because
exactly.
It was the first time. This is like first as tragedy, second time as farce.
Exactly. That's it. Oh my God. I was thinking literally the same thing when I was watching Stephen Miller, that it's like, this is like a funny Goebbels. Yeah.
Stephen Miller, famously not the most attractive man in history, got kind of like a melty face and sleepy eyes. And he's got this weird overeager way of pronouncing things that, you're kind of weird, dude. He comes off like a school shooter, If Matt Bomer was like, people hate me because I'm beautiful, I'd be like, okay. It doesn't hit when Stephen Miller says it.
Yeah, exactly. I love this thing that they all look deformed. He's like, they don't look like normal people. They're deformed.
Yeah. Monsters in soul, monsters in face. You're appealing to something that doesn't exist. Just like when you said all these other or like resistances are parts of networks, they don't have a network. So they just invent one out of thin air, like Antifa. Antifa's probably 2,000 people in the United States who's like, oh yeah, I'm Antifa. My Marxist Leninist reading group, we're Antifa.
I love that. I love this. Look, he goes on and he's like, every one of them through the course of their life and their decisions has scarred their body and their appearance in many different ways, to the point in which their outer appearance becomes a manifestation of their inner hatred. Trust your instincts. To all people and across all civilizations, you know what normal is. You know what beautiful is. You know what good is. You know that families are right. You know that children are precious and beautiful and must be protected. You know that.
Oh, there you
Like,
go.
this
That's your
is
moral
incredible
register
stuff.
again. So,
Yeah.
it's about, I mean, I found a great explanation for this. I mean, it's just one potential explanation, but it is that sort of one that originates with Gramsci and hegemony, right? And it's a crisis of hegemony and the effort to produce a moral panic in order to justify clamping down on dissent and legitimizing like a more strict law and order control approach. Because one of the ways one of the reasons for tying together all of these disparate elements into this sort of one seemingly homogeneous phenomenon, pointing to the way people look and connecting them to all these other things, and then giving them this like sort of fear of violence, and then the state needs to respond to this. Once they set this situation up, they have to respond to it. And I was looking at Stuart Hall, and he's quoting somebody saying this: when the state is not seen to be fulfilling this basic function in the face of a serious and sustained upsurge in violence, either criminal or political, we can be sure of one thing: that sooner or later, ordinary citizens will take the law into their own hands or will be disposed to support a new form of government better equipped to deal with the threat. So then there becomes this imperative, this political imperative. Like, if they don't want the Dems to get elected, they don't want some other party to get people's favor, they want to look like they're capable of handling this threat. And it sort of creates this loop. And we talked about escalation, what Stuart Hall calls a signification spiral.
Hey, that's a good term.
Yeah, it has these sort of stages of identification of a specific issue of concern, identifying a subversive minority, and then convergence, or linking by labeling of the specific issue to other problems.
So that sounds like semiotics. So
Yeah,
and then another way of saying that is you're making sign associations, and they're just like,
Oh yeah.
while we're at it, we might as well lump in as many things as we can try to fit in here into the same story as the thing that we have to respond to. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. And then this convergence interacts with those thresholds I was talking about, I hinted at, where you have like sort of civilized society, and then going into like non-civilized or deviant behavior, like sexual deviance, which is a big thing. That, sexual deviant behavior, it's not necessarily dangerous. It can be like, it's very non-violent, libertarian, pornographic, whatever. For example, in the 1970s, some homosexuals involved in the gay liberation movements did belong to the radical or Marxist left, a signification which, however, assumed that all homosexual reformers were Marxist revolutionaries, would be one which inflected a real convergence in an ideological direction, an exaggeration whose credibility would nevertheless, no doubt, depend on its kernel of truth. But again, he says that would be a misrepresentation both of the many reformers who were without overt political commitment and the critiques which Marxists made of traditional left attitudes towards sexual issues. The Marxists who think Marxism is not very not very welcoming
Not
to
gay.
homosexuals. So it's just it misrepresents the issue in like a million different ways, but that doesn't matter, because in the signification spiral, when you're trying to produce these convergences and escalate the issue from like, isolated moral panics into a general panic about social order, converging them based on these like essential features, picking out, like saying it's all violent, it's all radical leftism. Look at the homosexuals, look how these people look. They're all Marxists. It doesn't matter about the nuances and the realities, and that most of them aren't. That's just the strategy for convergence.
See, this makes sense because all transgenders have to be leftists because being leftist means to deviate from the norm. So even the Terrorgram Nazi Satanist transgender shooter is a leftist by virtue of being transgender. So everything gets caught in that spiral.
Yeah. And then the next stage is the prophecy of more troubling times to come. And then the final step is the call for more firm steps, which is exactly what they're working on now. I mean, this signification spiral perfectly describes situations just like this one. And this one is actually in the later stages, is in the prophecy of more troubling times to come if no action is taken, and the call for firm steps. We're actually in the last stages of the signifying spiral.
So, okay, Stuart Hall, he was writing this in the 70s and 80s, right? So what was the original time it happened? What was the crisis?
I mean, he was writing this. Stuart Hall and et al. Were writing "Policing the Crisis" about mugging in the 70s in the UK and how it was kind of used in the same way.
They had a mugging crisis that was blamed on leftists or leftists?
Well, it came over. They never used the word mugging. It came over from the States. Yeah, it came over from the States to the UK. Suddenly it appears this new vocabulary, and suddenly all these different things that were happening. I think some of the terms they used before were rolling people, like rolling, hooliganism, like all these different terms. They all suddenly just became like mugging crept into every similar instance, even if they were all very different kinds of.
And then there was a mugging crisis all of a sudden.
Yeah, there was this really, really significant event in 1972, I think it was, where these 3 people mugged somebody and they ended up getting stabbed. And the 3 people were given 20 and 10-year sentences for mugging and injuring the person. And instead of what would have usually happened was it was assault with intention to rob, it was put as an attempted murder. And it became this really significant sort of criminal case, and it changed the way that criminal cases were dealt with. And I guess he said that that was a flashpoint on the signification spiral, up past this general panic and up through this law and order society kind of response where it became sort of tied into this crisis of hegemony and the attempt of the state to shore up its legitimacy and its control on the core economic functions by eliciting consent from people by constructing this narrative about this challenge to society and social order. Yeah, that's sort of how it all goes. That's what's happening here, I think.
Well, that's a really useful framework, and it's been I think I have heard of this. It's kind of bringing it back. But if we do the signification spiral, the whole thing is in Rubio's speech because he begins with 9/11 because you have to. If you don't start with 9/11, there's no body count for terrorism in the United States.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So you have to start with 9/11. So he goes into granulate detail about 9/11. There was a network here. The network, we didn't pay attention. It changed everything, blah, blah, blah. 3,000 died, then 100 people more died in London, et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't, and then you have to tie this into leftists, of course. So first, I mean, you can say it as premise 1, terrorism exists. So he proves terrorism exists by 9/11.
So the specific issue is terrorism. And at first, the original subversive minority was radical Islam. That was the original that was the model subversive minority that was attached to that, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's
the Islamic network, terror network.
He kind of, he went back a little further in history to the radical politics of the 70s. But yeah, I think that it's reasonable.
So premise 1 is terrorism exists, 9/11. Number 2 is leftist terrorism exists. And then he goes back to 60s and 70s. He brings up
Right,
Red
yeah.
Brigades, Bader Meinhof, Weather Underground, which is especially funny. Weather Underground, as far as I know, only killed their own guys in a bomb explosion accidentally. And then Bader Meinhof and the Red Brigades, not American, but I think they killed like a few dozen each total. So that's his justification that left-wing terrorism exists. And then the next stage of the spiral that you mentioned is, okay, left-wing terrorism is resurgent. And he brings up Charlie Kirk. I think probably Charlie Kirk is the only legit. I mean, it's not, I don't know if you call it terrorism, but it's the closest thing. Then
And
he brings up the trans
assassination
shooter.
attempts.
Yeah, the trans shooter attacking the Catholic Church, the Terrorgram shooter. And then, what was it, Luigi?
Yeah.
Who has no discernible connection to any leftist anything. So I think it falls flat because then his call for action is right after that. We have to stop this. We have to prevent this. But the only example that you have is Charlie Kirk of ascended. Oh, and he uses BLM, right? He's talking about assassinations, and then the next sentence is BLM tried to destroy our cities. And I think the quotation is they tried to bring this country to its knees, as if BLM was just steps away from overthrowing the United States Republic. So, but then, okay, we have to join together and stop this from happening. It doesn't hit. And maybe that's why it's not being covered, because it's like, okay, we need to stop the network that killed Charlie Kirk. They were saying this too, like, obviously there's no network. Obviously, they were saying this too during Minnesota, like there's a network, and it was people in a Discord or people in a group chat who are like, okay, here's the cops. Here's where the cops are right now. Here's where ICE is right now. That's the network. But you can see, I think their real target again is funding. They want to go after people's bank accounts. They want to go after people associated with DSA by calling it a terrorist organization, or Hassan Piker or Amy Goodman. They want
Seizing assets
seize,
is
yeah.
probably a big part. Yeah. That's what they'll want to do, seize assets. But you can see there, there's the convergence. This is the signifying terrain. These are the ideological extensions within the signifying field. And you have your convergences of all these different groups: BLM, trans, leftist, political dissent, activism, social deviance or perceived social deviance. And then you have the thresholds. You have the connection to violence, where now suddenly this whole group gets this homogenizing label, leftist terrorism, and it is said to cross the violent thresholds and engage in assassination and violence. So there you have your convergence and your threshold. And then you have if we don't take action now, this is going to get worse. And then you have the government now, the state is going to call for some firm steps to be taken against this threat to the social order. And it's going to involve, yes, stricter laws, applying these international terrorism laws, because of course all of this domestic stuff is connected to international money pipelines that by left-wing radical terrorist organizations.
They did actually, the outcome was they did designate 4 European groups as, what is it called? Far left, FLTs. Antifa Ost in Germany, the Informal Anarchists Federation in Italy, the Armed Proletarian Justice in Greece, and the Revolutionary Class Self-Defense, also in Greece.
Yeah.
It just seems,
Yeah.
this seems like just a bizarre, like kids with reading groups in Greece seems like a very weird thing for Marco Rubio to be focused on.
Yeah, it's I was also thinking that there's something like the ideologically charged nature of it, and then the fact that there's been clearly some pretty wild cases of what we might call right-wing extremism and terrorism or whatever. There's I think there was a member of state senate in one state, I think maybe Minnesota, that was killed not too like early before Charlie Kirk. And then obviously there's things like January 6th. And I think it's interesting to me that obviously those things aren't mentioned, but I feel like its absence is maybe, and the fact that Trump also pardoned all the people, all the January 6 people, I think there's like an implicit by the absence of mentioning any of that, oh, that's actually just, people who are trying to defend civilization, right? Those are just people who are trying to like defend what's beautiful. Like they're not saying that, but I feel like there's a subtext to it where in a way it feels like they're doing what they maybe accuse the left of doing in a certain sense. There's like a mirror image or something.
Oh yeah, goes without saying. I do want to correct the record. I said that Armed Proletarian Justice was a reading group. They did conduct a bank robbery and stole 3,000 euros. So not a great bank robbery. And they also blew themselves up. Two of them blew themselves up while making an IED prepared or targeting law enforcement. So a little more than a reading group. But Erik, back to the Stuart Hall reading that you were telling us about. Here we have terrorism. Now, like retroactively, leftism is terrorism. They had mugging. So in the 70s, how did mugging become something that the leftists were doing, that now all leftists are muggers and muggers are leftists? How did that happen in that case?
One of the terms that Stuart Hall gives an example is student hooliganism. So the connecting together of like student protests and vandalism and violence. So he says something like this, connecting and identifying two almost wholly discrepant phenomena, but this also shifts the political terms of the issue that posed by the emergent student movement by re-signifying it in terms of a more familiar and traditional non-political hooliganism problem. That is, by translating a political issue into a criminal one, the link with violence and vandalism, thereby making easier a legal or control rather than a political response from the authorities. This transposition of frameworks not only depoliticizes an issue by criminalizing it, but it also singles out from a complex of different strands the most worrying element, the violent one. And finally, by signifying a political issue through its most extreme and violent form, signification helps to produce a control response and makes that response legitimate. So there's a lot of there's a lot of work being done by the state through this signification effort, I'm saying. And yeah, legitimate, and we know that the state is the one who has the legitimate, the monopoly on legitimate violence. So what the state does isn't really violence, because violence is transgressive.
Yeah, it is really convenient that Gladio, Condor, overthrowing the government of Chile, none of these were violent. It's really, really nice for them.
So there we have it. Imaginary convergences, therefore, serve an ideological function, Stuart Hall says, and that ideological function has real consequences, especially in terms of provoking and legitimating a coercive reaction by both the public and the state.
That seems like, well, good on you. That sounds like a pretty accurate explanation. So just to recap, in the 70s, it was some people got mugged. Now we have a mugging crisis. And it's not like violent mugging. It's different sorts of mugging, all now called mugging. This is the scary word. Now student protesters protesting war or whatever, they're mugs. They're mugging too. They're thugs mugging. We have to clamp down on the protests. Oh yeah, and then gays are communists. So clamp down on everybody. Everybody's protesting, civil rights protests, whatever. It's deep down, the core is violent mugging, right? And then today, it's terrorism. Leftists are planning, they're organizing anti-family terrorism at churches. Cuba is supporting it. Trans people are planning their next terrorist attack. So we need to clamp down on everybody and especially freeze DSA's bank account. I mean, that sounds about right, man. That sounds about right. And it's all done via semiotics, which I extra appreciate you bringing up. Now, I don't think this is going to work. I mean, I'm being optimistic, but I don't think this is going to work like this.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like they're trying to present this. But then who's the audience, right? Who are the 66 diplomats that are at this conference? And are they are they nodding along because they're like, yeah, we don't want these labor movements to get out of control? Or are they just, nodding along so that Rubio doesn't sanction them?
It makes me wonder, because it goes back to what you said about like first is tragedy, then is farce. Like, I think most people can tell, like you said, that this is kind of a farce, but there's a place for farce in an age of social media and like social media rhetoric and YouTube and conspiracy theories. So I feel like that's the audience in a way. I feel like the audience is not actually serious people, quote unquote, but is to contribute to that kind of rhetorical and ideological economy that we find online in these spaces that do have this kind of influence. Because this is going to fit perfectly with tons of figures like Candace Owens and, Tucker Carlson. Like, I'm sure they all love this shit. They're like, yeah, this is exactly what we're saying. And now the government's taking it seriously. And insofar as those media figures have an influence on MAGA voters, them having this official looking press conference to talk about that stuff then feeds into that rhetorical space. And then that rhetorical space can be like, look how serious they are. Even though everyone, I think, who's normal is kind of seeing that both of these groups are kind of a farce. So it's like I feel like it's like a weird, like aesthetic situation that has a real effect on the world, but it's hard to tell how significant it is. I feel like there is a line where if it does become actual McCarthyism or something, where I think the public's not going to really buy it. But it's like, if you just want to keep it at this level of aesthetics and rhetoric, then it's like, let's have fun with this and we can go back and forth. And
well, Candace won't work because she doesn't think leftists killed Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, that's true.
Tucker could go either way because he does think that the left is secretly undermining Western civilization, but he's also really anti-MAGA at the moment. So
yeah, that's true.
It depends if they hitch their wagon to the narrative.
I think that's where the limits of like the kind of Western Marxist cultural materialist analysis comes in too, is that it is kind of farcical. Because what they would hope for then, like what the cultural materialists would hope for, is like oppositional decoding and political resistance through sort of ideological like deciphering of like what's really going on here, and just seeing, I guess, getting to the point of seeing that it is just like a kind of hegemonic play to shore up the ruling class ideology and maintain control over the core like economic elements and get your consent while doing so. And therefore like there's a kind of revolutionary potential in decoding this sort of stuff. And then I think that's where sort of Baudrillard's more like pessimism is, I think, more accurate, is that people just sort of see it as a farce. Both sides are sort of, there's no reality. Both sides are sort of this semiotic loop, this signifying spiral isn't spiraling around any real core, like the economy, the structure, and it's like a superstructural semiotic signifying terrain. It's just so that you just respond with like, well, they're both silly, so I don't care.
I mean, that's the real explanation for it, right? Because we said this can't be sold because it's unbelievable. But it's unbelievable is kind of the point. Like Victor said way at the beginning, it's almost like Stephen Miller says what he says, knowing that he's going to get to watch libs calling him Goebbels on the TV at night. So everyone is in on the game. No one is meant to be the audience, even these diplomats. No one is meant to believe what is being said.
Yeah.
why it's being said. Then we have to go to the symbolic terrain. In the symbolic terrain, you're not allowed to just crack down on people or invade a country without a justification, right? Because it's impolite. It's not polite to just crack down. So you have to piece together something that you know is false, something that the audience knows is false, in order for the crackdown to be legitimate, because otherwise it's not polite.
Yeah.
And Rubio wants to be president, so he has to play the game with the Democrats. Now the Democrats, they don't believe in anything either. They need to be the ones to sit there after the crackdown happens and go, no, you went too far. Yes, there are some bad apples in DSA. Yes, we should get them off all the ballots. We agree, but now you're going too far. We don't want them to be in jail, right? So the DSA, the leftists are ruining the game by actually believing in something, by not playing by the rules that have been established. So the people who are playing the game have decided that, you know, they're deviating from the rules, but the Republicans are still following the rules. They're saying we have to crack down on these people because they're ugly. Look, everybody, see, they're ugly, right? Okay, crackdown is now legitimate. Invasion of Cuba is now legitimate, and the Democrats get to play their role of going, no. You guys are bad. You guys, this is not allowed. You've gone too far, even while fundamentally agreeing with the sentiment here. So the construction of the signification spiral that you introduced to us, Erik, the significance of the spiral itself is to offer legitimacy to what happens after. It is completely arbitrary whether or not the associations have anything to do with any outside system. And for the first time, I think, now they're allowed to show it. Now they're allowed to say, hey, look, we don't believe it, and we're still allowed to do it. And that's what I called hyperreal fascism, is we don't even believe it. We know, you know, we don't believe it, and we're still going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right.
Well, I think in my heart of hearts, I still do kind of hang on to the story that you know, the liberal establishment and the conservative establishment usually come together around like a traditionalist kind of reading of things, and the left is the sort of outcast. So you have the left on one side and the sort of liberal conservative centrist establishment on the other side. And sure, like the far right comes out and becomes a problem, but like, I don't know, when the chips are down, they kind of go away, and it seems to be kind of everybody versus the left. Because I think the left has the more coherent critique, because the right just engages in conspiracy theory, and the left has the sort of materialist critique, which I think is more destabilizing for the center than like Jews are running everything. That's not very destabilizing because it's obviously silly. When it comes down to it, again, like the violence is real that kind of narrative produces, but it's not. But the narrative itself doesn't get at the core of anything.
And it doesn't make sense with the Soviet Union. You can do McCarthyism, but like with Cuba, which is a third world country on its last legs, you can't blame Cuba for Amy Goodman and then use it as pretense to freeze Amy Goodman's bank accounts. No one would buy that.
No, I mean, maybe they could get away with it if they linked it in with enough other things, all the leftist violence, all the left terrorism,
Soros terrorism in Greece.
Then freezing Amy Goodman's bank accounts would be just the part of the sweeping crackdown that includes anti-ICE protesters, people dumping algae into swimming pools, and people murdering health executives. It would just be one thing rolled into whatever. What are they calling Trump's his directives, which are actually called? They had that acronym, National Security somethings.
NS
Mention it right at the beginning.
NSPM 7 is this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget what that stands for, but anyway, yeah, the next one of those, the next directive.
NSPM 8.
Yeah, national something security.
It looks like there
protocol.
actually already is NSPMs all the way up to 12. So, National Security Presidential Memorandum.
something. Anyway,
the reality principle is gone. They know it's gone. They're winking that it's gone while also pretending that it's not gone, but everybody knows it's gone. And that's scarier. It's scarier that they know. And our thoughts and prayers are with Amy Goodman.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hope democracy now keeps it up. Keeps it up.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if there's any like steps beyond the rhetorical, because I feel like right now my feeling, and it sounds like it's your feelings as well, is this is going to maybe stay at the level of like performative, like cynical ideology. But then if we see actual things happening,
But it is happening. It's it's spotty. It's not like on a grand scale, but I mean they're probably still testing the waters to see what they get away with. Like if they have these 66 countries and be like, all right, guys, this is the game now, and you can not play the game, and then we're going to tariff you or whatever leverage they have, and they almost certainly have some. Then if everyone's playing the game, it doesn't matter. Like belief is irrelevant.
I think also the older style analysis, this is like shocking stuff. I mean, again, like Stuart Hall or someone like that from the 70s and 80s. When you criminalizing left-wing activism is quite like shocking, I think. In that's 20th century, that's shocking. 21st century, if Trump, it's called the National Security Presidential Memorandum. That's what they're calling it. Number 7, which frames left-wing activism as a form of political terrorism. Like, that seems normal. That seems like, oh yeah, that's a perfectly legitimate like political move that the right is doing. Yeah, they're like criminalizing people expressing left-wing views. Like, oh, of course they're doing that. Why wouldn't they do that? If I were a right-wing politician and I could get away with doing that, if it's not illegal. I mean, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I don't agree with it. I think it sucks, but like, I guess it just doesn't have that shock value that the sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, the Overton window, I guess, might have been in a different place 50 years ago. But now that's a perfect move.
The Overton window has shifted is one way to say it, or the reality principle as it was is no longer there. There's no invisible decorum code that you have to follow that pertains to this. Now, I think it is interesting that there is still a code, right? They are still providing a justification, an unbelievable justification, but they still feel the need to show a justification. But they are at the same time flexing like, you're going to be satisfied with this shit.
Of course they're doing that. And why wouldn't they? And they're just sort of connecting it into this disrupt, identify, defund, debank, arrest, and prosecute thing that Stephen Miller was saying, which is basically treating like these, again, like quote unquote left-wing terrorists on the same terrain as Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other international terrorist organizations, like treating them with the same severity as those groups. Like, it's like every time that happens, it becomes a little less crazy. It's still crazy, but a little bit less, a little bit harder to oppose, because a little more normalized this time around. Each trip around the signifying spiral, it becomes a little less wacky.
Yeah, Al Qaeda, Red Brigades, the Charlie Kirk shooter. There you go. Some genius,
Yep.
I can't remember who it was, but I heard a really intelligent person on YouTube say everyone's a terrorist now.
Yeah, of course.
Props to whoever that was. Good call.
Then even like, I mean, it's nothing new as well that like left-wing groups have been claimed to have foreign funding and or be foreigners. I mean, I'm pretty sure in like the 19th century and early 20th century, anarchists were being called leftists and accused of having foreign funding or being foreign agents. And yeah, it's not different. It's happened before, but this is a new convergence, a new signifying spiral that the Trump administration is consciously using.
Yep, a new sign system, but yeah, I hope it doesn't work. We'll stay on it in case it does. Civilization against the encroaching darkness.
It is time for the people of the civilized world to defend ourselves, to stand united against this encroaching darkness and fight for what is ours.
All right, guys, it's good for today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all going to collapse under the weight of its own absurdity.
I'm sure they're going to add to it, is what I was going to say. Not that it's going to collapse. We'll keep up with it if they keep using terms like cancer and ugly people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Take care,
More
everyone.
selective. Yeah. Till next time.
Till next time, indeed.